Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. Today I'm going over a story about a woman named Nancy and her struggles throughout life from the time she was a child all the way up until she was an adult. It's just an amazing story, the things that she went through and the transformation that happened in her life. And we're going to dive into it, so stay tuned. So Nancy, when she was young, she craved the attention of others. By the time Nancy was 12, she was already smoking. And by the time she was 14, she was already drinking and getting high almost every day. And once she turned 15, she had already been abused, and that's when she went to harder drugs. And in addition to that, she began binging and purging. Inside, Nancy was feeling incredibly empty. Once she was in high school, she started dating a boy named Rob. In the beginning, he was kind, nice, everything was great. But that all changed very quickly. His true side started to come out, and he just was abusive. Rob had a bad temper, and there was one night where he got mad, he ripped the phone cord out of the wall, and in doing so, it hit Nancy in the side of her ear. It actually ended up rupturing her eardrum. So after this occurrence, Nancy moved back home with her folks, as she had been living with him despite her being in high school. That's when she met a young man named Gary. Well, same scenario. He was nice and kind at the very beginning, but things changed quickly thereafter because Gary was also abusive. For a while, it was just words, but as we all know, a lot of times words are a lot worse than physical. But anyhow, things continued to get worse and worse, and there was a point where Nancy actually got pregnant, and despite her being pregnant, the abuse did not stop. It actually continued to get worse. Despite the abuse, Nancy stayed with Gary, and she did clean up her act a little bit for herself. She stopped smoking and drinking during her pregnancy, but she still went out with Gary all the time because he didn't stop. He was still partying and going to the bars and everything, so she just went along with him. Well, one night, Gary had been out with friends, and he had drank quite a bit. He came home, he was angry, had a temper, and he ended up pushing Nancy, like really hard. Well, this made her mad, so she started shoving him right back. Before they knew it, they were rolling around on the ground fighting, and Gary was on top of Nancy. And this was when she was pregnant, so she had the full pregnant belly and everything, and he was just right on top of her. Well, this whole occurrence forced Nancy to go into labor. So obviously that stopped the fight. And she went to the hospital, ended up having the baby and everything. Thank goodness it was okay. And after that, Nancy decides once again to move home with her folks. Now, for a little while, her and Gary did try to work it out for the baby's sake, but it just didn't happen. That wasn't going to work. Nancy was now a single mom. She was stressed, and I mean, as any mom is, especially if you're a single mama. So she was young and she was by herself. This is when Nancy picked up the drugs and the drinking again, and she also began binging and purging. She knew she had a problem, so she saw her physician, and he ended up diagnosing her with depression and ADD. He gave her medication for the depression, and then he told her that she would need to see a therapist. 3 years goes by. And in that 3-year time span, Nancy had seen so many doctors. She had seen a nutritionist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a master of social work, and a licensed clinical social worker. During that 3-year span, she had been put on several drugs, one after the other, because nothing was seeming to help. And the drugs that she was on, she listed as Prozac, then Paxil, then Wellbutrin, Zoloft, Buspar, and then also a mood stabilizer. But none of these drugs seemed to do a thing. In fact, Nancy says they masked her true feelings. she just felt blank. She couldn't live. Plus, all the terrible side effects from these type things, that was also not good. Now, during this whole time, while on this different cocktail of different medications, she kept drinking, binging, and purging, and the whole thing. She never stopped. Once Nancy was 21, she attended beauty school. She was able to get a job, get out on her own. So these were baby steps. This was good. Despite that, though, Nancy still craved the attention of others. She so deeply just wanted to belong. In addition, she knew that, okay, I need to find a good man. That's what she wanted as well. So it was soon thereafter she met a man named Matt. He was fun at the start, like they all were. But soon thereafter, his dark side came out, I guess you could say. He was very controlling, and he'd always be suspicious of where she was, who she was with, and he'd start, accusations of her cheating and things like that. He just was doing that 24/7, it seemed. She never did move in with Matt because of this, and it was soon thereafter she told him, look, this is not going to work, and she broke it off. One day, Nancy was at the salon working, and she was doing this lady's hair. And she starts venting to this lady, about all her troubles and her everything with Matt that had been going on. And she says this lady, she was different, but she was also kind. This lady always seemed to ask Nancy how she and her daughter Brooke were doing, so Nancy thought that was great. She loved that somebody was asking about her life. And because of that, Nancy felt she could tell this woman anything. And what Nancy really was searching for, she wanted sympathy. That's what she wanted. But that's not what she got. Instead, this lady, her name was Anne, she would just start quoting scripture. And then she told Nancy that she had brought all these problems on herself because of the way she was living. Well, this shocked Nancy to the core. She thought to herself, how dare she? This really ticked Nancy off. And so after finishing her hair, she was glad to see the lady go. But that didn't deter Anne. Anne kept coming back for more hair appointments as time went on. And each time that Nancy would see Anne's name in the book, she'd be like, oh, really? Nancy had just thought this lady, Anne, had lost her marbles. And she dubbed her, she just gave her a nickname, the Crazy Lady. Well, one day comes and Nancy had just dropped her daughter Brooke off at the sitter. And she was going to drive back home and get ready for work for the morning. Well, she drives back home and then she decides, I want to take a quick little walk. So she goes and does that. Then she goes back up to her bathroom. She turns her little curling iron on to start heating up. And then, biggest shock of her life, she just screams. I mean, belts. Reason being, guess who pops out behind the shower curtain in her bathroom? None other than Matt. It about gave Nancy a heart attack. So yelling starts. He starts demanding, where's she been? Who has she been with? The whole thing that he always did. And she yells back, well, pushing and shoving ensue. And before they know it, they're both on the floor, rolling and fighting. And Matt gets on top of her, and he has both of his hands around her throat. Now Nancy's arms and legs are flailing all over the place because she's fighting for her life. But thankfully, Matt comes to his senses. He realizes what he's doing, and he loosens his grip. That's when Nancy quickly jumps up. She grabs the hot curling iron, and she starts threatening him with it. He continues to inch closer and closer towards her, and she's like, don't do it, I'm warning you. Well, of course he doesn't listen. So she hits him across the face with that hot curling iron, which of course makes him very angry. He ends up punching her in the ear, and of course they're still yelling and fighting. Well, that goes on for a little bit, and she's just yelling for him to get out of her house, to leave for good, and eventually, thank goodness, Matt storms out, and that's the last that she remembers anything having to do with Matt. Now, obviously, That's a wild morning. Nancy wanted so badly to call in sick to work, but she couldn't because she had just gotten a new assistant manager position at the salon. So by the time she arrives at the salon, she's clearly shaken up about the whole event of the morning, and now her ear is swollen. There in the salon, in addition to her morning, was a man named Bob. Bob was the husband of the crazy lady. He could tell that something was very wrong, so Bob begins to ask Nancy questions, like to see if she's okay. That's when Nancy just sobs. She starts crying like crazy, and she starts telling Bob everything that went down with Matt. Well, the following day, his wife, Ann, comes in for an appointment, and she brought a physical Bible with her. At first, Ann was very quiet. She didn't really say much, but she did end up taking her Bible out that day, and she ended up pointing to a few verses, showing Nancy them. Now, at first, when she first started to do that, Nancy thought in her head, great, here we go again. But she knew something was piercing her spirit about those verses. She knew deep down that what Ann was showing her, that was truth. It was soon after this occurrence that Nancy met a man named Brian. Brian was great. He loved Nancy. He loved her daughter. He had his own business, but he also loved to party. At first, they took it slow. They eventually did move in with each other, and Nancy started having dreams. One day, she wanted to save up for her own house, for her own salon, for her business. And she thought what she wanted at the time was, well, maybe Brian and I can save together and, be able to buy a house. At the same time in her life, Ann starts to invite Nancy to church. She turned her down several times, time after time, but Nancy kept inviting. So there was a time, Nancy was kind of like, okay, finally, I guess I'll go. So she goes. She liked it. So she went back a few more times. And one Easter, the pastor gave an invitation for anybody to raise their hands if they'd like to know Jesus. And Nancy raised her hand. She became a believer that day. Ann was excited. So Ann ended up buying a nice Bible for Nancy. This excited Nancy because this was also new and she loved it. In addition, Ann invited Nancy to a women's retreat with a couple of her other friends. And so the retreat was in Cape Cod. They all went and roomed together, and it was a great time. Nancy even got baptized there. Nancy learned at that retreat what God's will actually was for his children. And she also learned the importance of reading the Bible. Meanwhile, back home, Brian began to tell Nancy that she was changing right before his very eyes. Nancy was no longer the woman he met when they first started dating. And Nancy says at this point in her life, she loved Brian, but she now knew the Bible more and she wanted to know more. So because of her conviction of just everything she had been doing, she ends up moving out yet again, back home with her folks. Now, her and Brian continued to date for a while, but Nancy knew deep down Brian wasn't the one for her. So she did end up breaking it off. And she said that within 3 months, Brian went to a school reunion and he met up with an old girlfriend. And within 3 months, they were married. Meanwhile, Nancy, she just kept learning all she could about the Bible and reading it. And she got to the place in her mind where she thought, I need to practice these things, not just read it. So she starts to do that. And that's when she said God began working miracles in her life. There was this client that Nancy had that she did hair for, and she sold houses. Well, there was this one house. It was so cute. It was the perfect little size, and it even had room for a salon in the home, just like Nancy wanted. But there was no way Nancy could afford this. So Nancy did something I found so cool. She started every morning getting up a little bit earlier, and she would drive to this house. She'd park, she'd get the key from the client, she'd go into the house, and she would pray. She did this just about every day for a full month. She knew on paper, I can't afford it. but she felt God leading her to take a leap of faith and to trust him. And that's exactly what Nancy did. Nancy at that time had $517 in savings. The people selling the home wanted $500 down. Those were the days. Anyway, so she had just enough to do the down payment. Each month, the rent would be $711. And Nancy says that some way, God always made a way. Every month, she had enough for the rent and all the bills. It seemed like everything was falling into place. And Nancy said that God, he was answering her prayers. Nancy was super proud of herself that she was getting her life together. And she was so happy because she did it all without the help of a man. You know, all her life, she wanted the attention of men, and it was one after the other, bad relationship after the other. But this time, she was taking control of her life, putting her faith in God, and things were happening. Soon enough, Nancy was able to start her dream, her own salon out of her home. After that, that's when Nancy started to pray for a husband. She wanted somebody to do life with. And so she would pray for that. She wanted a man that loved God, loved her, and of course, loved her daughter, Brooke. And it's funny, I thought this was very cute in the story where Nancy talks about when she'd pray these things to God, she'd also, kind of chat with God and be like, Lord, it'd be an awesome bonus if he could cook, maybe. So she really wanted somebody that cooked. Soon after that, she met Mike at church. And she felt, after time, that God was leading her, or showing her rather, that that's the one she needed to marry. They ended up dating each other, and they did get married. Oh yeah, can't forget this part. And get this, it just happened that Mike was the head chef at a nice restaurant in town. So Nancy's like, thank you, God. He answered that little bonus prayer. I thought that was very cool and very cute. Nancy says that the more she gave God a little bit more trust here's a little bit more and more, that healing began to take place within her. And this is the part of the story I really love that Nancy said. She says that she didn't have to clean her act up when she came to God. She came to him like she was, flaws and all, and she let God in. And that's when God slowly started to rearrange house, and he changed her one room at a time. After 14 years of smoking on the daily, Nancy quit. After 10 years with an eating disorder, Nancy said goodbye to that. She also at that time met two other ladies within the church that became friends. They also struggled with eating disorders. So it was perfect because they were able to be a support system to each other. Whenever one of the women would struggle or be tempted to go back to their old ways with binging and purging, they would call each other and say, I'm struggling, and they'd be able to encourage each other and help each other. This time in Nancy's life was finally a place where she knew and she felt that she was loved. She didn't need alcohol, the drugs. She didn't even need therapy or all the pharmaceuticals that she had tried over the years. She just needed God. As of 2008, when this story was written, her and Mike had already been married 8 years and added 2 more kiddos to their family. There was, of course, little ups and downs throughout their whole marriage, like anyone, but they both put God first. They both loved God, and they were able to work out those differences and those little spats that came up. And of course, Nancy says there were times over the years that Nancy fell back into things, and, like we all do, none of us are perfect. You see, just whenever she was tempted and had a little slip, she knew, I got to repent. I've got to ask for forgiveness. And that's what she did. She says God never let her down. At the end of her story, she talks about, doing hair. And now her clients vent to her, whereas she used to vent to the clients that came in. So now it's the opposite. And she says that now Nancy, is the crazy lady because now she's the one that has her physical Bible and is more likely to pull it out to show the clients different verses. So I thought that was really funny. It just came full circle there. But what an incredible story. I loved the most, like I said earlier, in her story, how she says she came as she was. I think a lot of times we humans, we're just so, I can't do that because we feel ashamed. And so we don't want to go to God because we just put it on the back burner. We don't even want to deal with it. But you don't have to. You just come like you are, like Nancy did. She was a drug addict and, alcohol, you name it. She did it. She had an eating disorder. She didn't waste time thinking, oh no, I gotta be clean before I talk to God. No, she went to God and slowly, I liked how it said, God started to rearrange the furniture there. And then over time, another room and another room until Nancy was a completely different person, but for the better. I just love this story. I hope you guys did too, and I hope you can get something out of it, something positive to take away. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you guys next time.